Although she was only 5 and the youngest of the Bradbury children, Melissa had very sharp eyes. And it wasn't really surprising that she was the first to discover that something strange had happened to the house on Maple Street while the Bradbury family was summering in England. She ran and found her older brother Brian and told him something was wrong upstairs on the 3rd floor. She said she would show him, but not until he swore not to tell anyone what she had found. Brian swore, knowing it was their stepfather Melissa was afraid of. Daddy Lou didn't like it when any of the Bradbury children, quote-unquote, got up to foolishness, and he decided that Melissa was the prime offender in that area. It would probably turned out to be nothing anyway, but Brian was delighted to be back home and willing enough to humor his baby sister, at least for a while. He followed her down the 3rd floor hallway without so much as a murmur of argument and only pulled up her braids. They had to tiptoe past Lou's study because Lou was inside unpacking his notebooks and papers and muttering in an ill-tempered way. Brian's thoughts had actually turned to what might be on TV tonight. He was looking forward to a pig out on good old American cable after 3 months on BBC. When they reached the end of the hall, what he saw beyond the tip of his little sister's pointing finger drove all thoughts of television from Brian's mind. "Now swear again," Melissa whispered. "Never tell anyone, Daddy Lou or anyone, or hope to die." "Hope to die." Brian agreed, still staring, and it was half an hour before he told his big sister Laurie, who was unpacking in her room. "Sorry," Brian said, "but I've got to show you something. It's very weird." "Where?" She was putting on clothes in her drawers as if she didn't care. But Brian could tell when Laurie was interested, and she was interested now. "Upstairs, 3rd floor, end of the hall past Daddy Lou's study." Laurie's nose wrinkled the way it always did when Brian or Alyssa called him that. She and Trent remembered their real father, and they didn't like his replacement at all. "I don't want to go up there," Laurie said. "He's been in a pissy mood ever since we got back. Trent said he'll stay that way until school starts, and then he can settle back into his rut again. His door's shut. We can be quiet. And if you're really worried about him coming out, we can see an empty suitcase. If he opens the door, we'll pretend like we put it in the closet when we take it out." "What is this amazing thing?" Laurie demanded, putting her fists on her hips. "I'll show you," Brian said earnestly, "but you have to swear on Mom's name and hope to die if you tell anyone." He paused, thinking for a moment, and then added, "You especially can't tell Alyssa, because I'd swore to her." Laurie's ears finally went up, all the way up. "Okay, I swear." It took along 2 empty suitcases, one for each of them, but their precautions proved unnecessary. Their stepfather never came out of his study. They could hear him stamping about, muttering, opening drawers, slamming them shut again. But a moment later, when she looked at the place Alyssa had pointed to Brian and then Brian pointed to her, she forgot all about Lou completely. "What is it?" she whispered to Brian. "My gosh, what does it mean?" "I don't know," Brian said, "but just remember, you swore on Mom's name, Laurie." She could have strangled him, but a promise was a promise, especially when given on the name of your one and only mother. So Laurie had on for more than one full hour before getting Trent and showing him. She made him swear not to tell too as the oldest, and he had no one to tell. Trent stood looking at what the other children looked at before him. He stood there for a long time. "What is it, Trent?" Laurie finally asked. It never crossed her mind that Trent wouldn't know. Trent knew everything. So she watched almost incredulously as he slowly shook his head. "I don't know," he said, peering into the crack. "Some kind of metal, I think. Wish I brought a flashlight." He reached in the crack and tapped. Laurie was relieved when Trent pulled his finger back. "Yeah, it's metal." "Should it be in there?" Laurie asked. Was it before? No, Trent said. I remember when they were plastic, but that was just after Mom married him. There wasn't anything in there but laths. What are they? Narrow boards, he said. They go between the plaster and the outside of the wall of the house. Trent reached into the crack into the wall and once again touched the metal. The crack was about 4 inches long and 4.5 inches across at the widest point. They put in insulation too, he said, frowning thoughtfully as he's shoving his hand back into the back pocket with his faded washed jeans. I remember. Pink billowy stuff looks like cotton candy. Where is it then? I don't see any pink stuff. Me either, Trent said, but they did put it in, I remember. His eyes traced the 4-inch length of the crack. That metal on the wall is something new. I wonder how much of it there is and how far it goes. Is it just up here on the 3rd floor or what? Laurie looked at him with big round eyes. She began to be a little frightened. Or is it all over the house? Trent finished thoughtfully. After school the next afternoon, Trent called a meeting of all 4 Bradbury children. He got off somewhat to a bumpy start, with Lissa accusing Brian of breaking what she called, quote-unquote, your solemn swear, and Brian accusing Laurie of putting their mother's soul in dire jeopardy by telling Trent. Hush, all of you, Trent said. What's done is done. I happen to think it all worked out for the best. You do? Brian asked. Something this weird needs to be investigated. If we waste a lot of time arguing over who was right or wrong to break the promise, we'll never get it done. Trent glanced pointedly up at the clock of his room where they had gathered. It was 20 after 3. He didn't really have to say anything anymore. Their mother had been up this morning to get Louis breakfast, but afterwards she had gone back to bed, and there she had remained. She suffered from dreadful migraines. She wouldn't see them on the 3rd floor, but quote-unquote Daddy Lou was a different kettle of fish altogether. With a study just down the hall from the strange crack, they could conduct their investigations while he was away. And that was what Trent's glance at the clock had meant. Lou had left shortly after noon with a briefcase full of papers, but he might be back any time between now and 5. Still, they had some time, and Trent was determined they weren't going to spend it squabbling about who swore what to whom. Laurie spoke for all of them when she said, just tell us what to do, Trent, and we'll do it. Okay, Trent said. We'll need some things. He took a deep breath and began explaining what they were. Once they were convened around the crack of the end of the 3rd floor hallway, Trent had held Lissa up so she could shine the beam of a flashlight in the crack. They could all see the metal. He turned to Laurie and asked her to give him the drill. Brian and Lissa exchanged uneasy glances. Laurie passed it over. They were afraid Daddy Lee would notice if he drilled holes in the wall outside his study. Look, Trent said, holding the drill out so they could get a look. This is what they call a needlepoint drill bit. See how tiny it is? Since we're only going to drill behind the pictures, I don't think we have to worry. There were about a dozen frame prints along the 3rd floor hallway. Half of them beyond the study door, on the way to the closet at the end where the suitcases were stored. He doesn't even look at them, let alone behind them, Laurie agreed. She took down the picture and it hung close to the small crack of the plaster and gave it to Brian. Trent drilled. The drill bit went easily into the wall, and the hole it made was every bit as tiny as promised. After a dozen or so more turns of the drill handle, Trent stopped and reversed, pulling the bit free. Why'd you quit? Brian asked. It's something hard. More metal? Lissa asked. I think so. Sure wasn't wood. Let's see. He shone the light in and cocked his head this way and that before shaking decisively. My head's too big. Let's boost Lissa. Laurie and Trent lifted her up, and Brian handed her the flashlight. Alyssa squinted for a time and said, "Just like in the crack I found." "Okay," Trent said. "Next picture." The drill hit metal behind the second and the third as well. Behind the fourth, by this time they were quite close to the door to Lou's study. It went all the way up in before Trent pulled it out. This time when she was boosted up, Alyssa told them she saw quote-unquote pink stuff. "Yep, the insulation I told you about," Trent said to Laurie. "Let's try the other side of the hall." They had to drill behind 4 pictures on the east side of the corridor before they struck first wood lath and then the insulation behind the plaster. As they were hanging the last picture, they heard the out-of-tune snarl of Lou's elderly Porsche turning into the driveway. Trent quickly turned the picture. "Go," he whispered. "Downstairs, TV room." The back door slammed downstairs as Lou came in. There was a moment of almost unbearable suspense when the only sounds were the kids' footsteps on the stairs and then Lou bawled up at them from the kitchen. "Keep it down, can't you? Your mother's taking a nap." And if that doesn't wake her up, Laurie thought, nothing will. During the next week and a half, they drilled other holes around the house when there wasn't no one to see them. Holes behind posters in their various rooms, behind the refrigerator in the pantry, and the downstairs closets. Trent even drilled one in the dining room hall, high up on one corner where the shadows never quite left. He stood on top of the stepladder while Laurie held it steady. There was no more metal anywhere, just lath. The children forgot about it for a little while. One day, about a month later, after Lou had gone back to teaching full-time, Brian came to Trent and told him there was another crack in the plaster on the 3rd floor, but that he could see more metal behind it. Trent and Alyssa came at once. Laurie was still in school at band practice. As for the occasional of the first crack, their mother was lying down with a headache. Lou's temper had improved once he was back at school. But he had a crackerjack argument with their mother the night before about a party he wanted to have for fellow faculty members in the history department. If there was anything the former Mrs. Bradbury hated and feared, it was playing hostess at faculty parties. Lou had insisted on this one, however, and she had finally given in. Now she was lying in the shadowy bedroom with a damp towel over her eyes while Lou was presumably passing around invitations in the faculty lounge. The new crack was on the west side of the hallway between the study door and the stairwell. "You sure you saw metal in there?" Trent asked. "We checked," decided Bride. "Look for yourself," Bride said, and Trent did. There was no need for a flashlight. This crack was wider, but there was no question about the metal at the bottom of it. After a long look, Trent told them he had to go to the hardware store right away. "Why?" Alyssa asked. "I want to get some plaster. I don't want to have to see that crack." He hesitated and added, "And I especially don't want him to see the metal inside it." Alyssa frowned at him. "Why not, Trent?" But Trent didn't exactly know, at least not yet. They started drilling again, and this time they found metal behind all the walls in the 3rd floor, including Lou's study. Trent snuck in one afternoon with the drill while Lou was at the college and their mother was out shopping for their upcoming faculty party. Their mother would look very pale when drawing these days, and even Alyssa had noticed. But when any of the children asked her if she was okay, she would always flash a troubling, overbright smile and tell them, "Never better." One of Lou's advanced degrees was hanging on the wall over his desk in the frame. While the other children clustered outside the door, nearly vomiting with terror, Trent removed the framed degree from its hook, laid it on the desk, and drilled a pinhole in the center of the square where it had been. 2 inches in, and the drill hit metal. Trent carefully rehung the degree, making very sure it wasn't crooked, and came back out. They drilled holes at intervals along the stairs to the 2nd floor and found metal behind these walls too. The metal continued roughly halfway down the 2nd floor hallway as it proceeded toward the front of the house. It was behind the walls of Brian's room, but only one of the wall of Laurie's. "It hasn't finished," growing in here, Laurie said darkly. Trent looked at her surprised. Huh? Before she could reply, Brian had to brainstorm. Try the floor, Trent, he said. See what's in there, too. Trent shrugged and drilled into the floor of Laurie's room. The drill went in all the way with no resistance, but when he peeled back the rug at the foot of his own bed and tried it there, he soon encountered a solid steel or solid whatever it was. Then, at Liss's insistence, he stood on a stool and drilled up into the ceiling. Boink, he said after a few moments. More metal. Let's quit for the day. Laurie was the only one who saw how deeply troubled Trent looked. That night after lights out, it was Trent who went to the Laurie's room, and Laurie didn't even pretend to be sleepy. The truth was, neither of them had been sleeping very well in the last couple of weeks. What did you mean? Trent whispered, sitting down beside her. About what? Laurie asked, getting up on one elbow. You said it hadn't finished growing in her room. What did you mean? Come on, Trent. You're not dumb. No, I'm not, he agreed, but I just wanted to hear you say it, Sprat. If you call me that, you never will. Okay, Laurie, you satisfied? Yes. That stuff's growing all over the house, she paused. No, that's not right. It's growing under the house. That's not right either. Laurie thought about it inside. Okay, she said, it's growing in the house. It's stealing the house. Is that good enough for you, Mr. Smarty? Stealing the house. Trent sat quickly beside her on the bed. At last he nodded and flashed the smile she loved. Yes, that's good enough. Whatever you call it acts like it's alive. Trent nodded. But that isn't the worst. What is? It's sneaky. Her eyes were big and frightened. That's the part I really don't like. I don't know what started it or what it means, but I really don't care. But it's sneaking. I feel like something's going to happen, Trent. Only I don't know what. And it's like being in a nightmare. You can't get all the way out of. Does it feel like that to you sometimes? A little, yeah. But I know something's going to happen. But I might even know what. She bolted to a sitting position and grabbed his hands. You know? What? What is it? I can't be sure, Trent said, getting up. I think I know, but I'm not ready to say what I think yet. I have to do some more looking. If we drill many more holes, the house is going to fall down. I didn't say drilling, I said looking. Looking for what? For something that isn't here yet. That hasn't grown yet. When it does, I don't think it'll be able to hide. Tell me, Trent. Not yet. He said, and planted a small kiss on her cheek. Besides, curiosity killed the Sprat. I hate you, he cried in a low voice and flopped back down on the sheet over her bed. But you felt better after having a talking with Trent and slept better than she had for a week. Trent found out what he was looking for 2 days before the big party, and as the oldest, he perhaps should have noticed that his mother had become looking alarmingly unhealthy, rubbing at her temples all the time, although she denied, almost in a panic, that she had a migraine. He did not notice these things, however. He was too busy looking. He went through every closet in the big old house at least 3 times, at the crawl space level of the study 5 or 6 times, and the big old cellar half a dozen times. It was in the cellar that he finally found it. This was not to say he hadn't found peculiar things in other places. He most certainly had. There was a knob of stainless steel poking out of the ceiling of a second-floor closet. A curved metal armature of some kind had burst through the side of the luggage closet on the 3rd floor. It was a dim, polished gray until he touched it. And when he did that, it flushed a dusky rose color, and he felt faint but powerful humming sound keep on the wall. He's snatched his hand back as the armature were hot and the curved metal thing went gray again. The humming stopped at once. The day before in the attic, he had observed a cobweb of thin interlaced cables growing in a low, dark corner under the eave. Trent had been crawling around on his hands and knees where he suddenly spied this amazing phenomenon. He froze in place, staring at a tangle of hair as the cables spun themselves out of nothing at all, or so it looked anyway. Met, wrapped around each other so tightly they seemed to merge, and they continued spreading until they reached the floor, where they drilled in and anchored themselves in dreamy little puffs of sawdust. They seemed to be creating some sort of limber or bracework, and it looked as if they would be very strong, able to hold the house together through a lot of buffing and hard knocks. What buffeting, though? What hard knocks? Again, Trent thought he knew. It was hard to believe, but he thought he knew. Far beyond the workshop area and the furnace, there was a little closet at the north end of the cellar, which their real father called his quote-unquote wine cellar. Lou came in here even less frequently than he had went into the workshop, but didn't drink wine, and their mother no longer drank wine either. There was a padlock on the wine cell door, but the key hung right next to it.